Well, budget day wasn't exactly how we thought it was going to go, was it? We thought we'd get a budget. We'd be like, okay, well, that's a lot of spending. We'll see what happens with all that money and how that's going to essentially affect our country moving forward. But it was really the drama on the Hill that really grabbed the attention yesterday. Mr. MP Chris d'Entremont decided to leave the Conservative caucus and go ahead and cross the floor to the Liberal Party of Canada. We covered that last night here on our live stream, and it was... people are fired up, and understandably so, especially those who voted that man in and their riding, wanting a Conservative to represent them, and ended up getting a Liberal instead. It reminded me of the Doug Ford meme that MP Jamil Javani had shared after election night, where he's ripping off the shirt, and underneath is the Liberal Party shirt underneath of it all. It's kind of what it reminds me of. That was shocking enough. And then also we saw the budget and what it was, and then more news started breaking that Mr. Mark Carney could have a majority government by the end of this week. This is crazy, and we're going to be covering all of it. Welcome to the Elevate Podcast. I'm your host, Josh. If you're getting value from today's episode, take the time to like, share, and subscribe. It helps us to grow. It helps us to get to new audiences, and it helps people see that there is something different than what the mainstream media has to offer. Now, let's get into our first story, shall we? As I said, this is what grabbed the headlines yesterday. Mr. d'Entremont of Acadie Annapolis would be crossing the floor to the Liberal Party of Canada, and a lot of people are asking questions. He says he's talked to his constituents. He says he's spoken to his family. But people really want to know is, what were you offered? What did they promise you? That you would commit career suicide and join the Liberal Party of Canada when you've been so outspoken against Mark Carney. You've been so outspoken against the Liberal Party and what they're doing and how they are essentially mortgaging our future. Why would you switch now? Is it because you were upset, Pierre Poilievre? Were you upset with the Conservative Party? Were you so bitter that they wouldn't back you for a speaker position that you said, you know what, screw you, the first chance I get, I'm crossing? What was it? People wanted to know. People were asking questions. Well, Brian Lilley of the Toronto Sun, he also has his own column that he has on Substack, where he broke down a lot of things he's been hearing on the Hill. And this is what I thought was very fascinating. He started off by saying this. He says, let's start with the sexy stuff, because the budget is definitely not sexy. We have a floor crosser. It's been a while since an MP elected with one party crossed the floor to sit with another. The last one I can remember was Jenica Atwin, the Green MP who had strange obsession with Israel, deciding that her party wasn't anti-Semitic enough and crossed to join Trudeau's Liberals. Now we have a Conservative MP, Chris d'Entremont from Acadie Annapolis in Nova Scotia, becoming Liberal MP Chris d'Entremont from Acadie Annapolis in Nova Scotia. He floated the idea that he would cross the floor to support the budget to Politico, when most Ottawa journalists were literally locked up, not able to effectively communicate with the outside world while they pored over details of the 2025-2026 federal budget. But after the budget was delivered, d'Entremont had a tense moment with Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre in the lobby of the House of Commons. Depending on who you believe, Poilievre kicked him out of the Conservative caucus, or d'Entremont said, you can't fire me, I quit, depending on your perspective. And this was something that even the likes of Stuart Benson brought up on X as well, was when the announcement of the budget was first being brought up in the House. Noticeably absent was Pierre Poilievre and Chris d'Entremont, and this was where that was happening. In the halls of the House of Commons, these guys were having it out. I'm sure a very heated conversation. And when this happens, this is a big issue, and I can see why it would have gotten heated. But, it's just one crosser, but, it brings them within two people of getting that majority, which is the scary part, isn't it? And this is where things get interesting and where rumors are starting to build up more and more. As a reaction to the budget filtered out, a news release was issued by d'Entremont's change of colors. Prime Minister Mark Carney is offering the path to the new budget that hits the priorities I have heard most in my riding: to build a strong community, infrastructure, and grow a stronger economy, d'Entremont said. That is why I'm joining the government caucus. I have to say that d'Entremont is one of the names that was floating around over the last few weeks as a possible floor crosser. The other names given to me by my Liberal sources at the time were Dominique Vienne from the Belle-Chasse riding on the South Shore across from Quebec City, and Joel Godin, a Quebec MP from Portneuf, Jacques Cartier, a suburban riding north of Quebec City. Watch to see what these two MPs do over the coming days. When the news first broke that potentially a floor crosser could take place, a lot of people was like, really? Could that happen? Could that happen? And then over time, it's just like, it might just be BS. Could it happen? I don't know. Who would it be? We don't know. That is career suicide. Like, what would they actually do it? Then Don Tremont drops that news yesterday. And it's like, oh, this is real. This could happen. And then to hear 2 more people are on the verge of potentially crossing to be with the Liberals, that would essentially secure Mark Carney's majority. And it takes me back to the heated interaction between Poilievre and Don Tremont, of why it would be so heated. First off, if you're fighting so hard for your constituents, the most impact the Conservative Party has been able to have in close to 10 years in being able to hold this Liberal government to account. And now you're just going to be bleeding MPs across to that very party who is mortgaging our future, who continues to borrow, calling it investment, and sewering our dollar in the process. We looked at it on the podcast yesterday, the live stream. We saw our Canadian dollar tank in real time as in the lead up to the budget and as the budget was announced. The markets are reacting that this was not a good budget and that it's just more borrowing with no guarantee that we'll ever see that money back. And not only that, they secure a majority. And then they're able to push all these crazy bills. They're able to push these internet censorship bills. They're able to continue to control what you see on the internet, control what you see on social media, and more control is exerted over the Canadian population. Not only that, you do have to think about the fact that if all 3 of these go through, we already have 1, if 2 more go, that would essentially spell the end of Pierre Poilievre as leader of the Conservative Party of Canada. I don't see how he would survive his leadership review if these 3 go, because essentially you're now dealing with a majority government for 3.5 years. And you're going to have to use that time to rebuild the party with a new leader. That's likely what would end up happening, unfortunately. So there's a lot at stake that we're currently seeing here, folks. I'm not here to gloss over or sugarcoat the facts on this one. This very much could happen, and we have to be prepared for it. You got to hope for the best. That these people decide to have integrity, that they decide to are going to be people of their word, essentially, at this point. And that if they ran under the Conservative banner, that they will stay a Conservative no matter what their grievances are with the current party at the moment. There's way too much at stake. You have one party who claims they're investing, and people who believe that they're actually investing after the 10 years of them using the same mantra for year over year and not seeing any returns for the investments they've made. If you actually believe this, then I have a bridge to sell you, my friends. And it shows you how weak you are in your character, because it's not just about changing party colors. You're now changing the fate of our country and essentially giving the Liberals a blank check to do whatever they so please at that point. And they can do a lot of damage in 3.5 years. We saw what Trudeau did between 2021 and 2024. So, alas, that is where that is at. But I do want to kind of focus ourselves to another idea that's been circulating that I want to kind of explain and talk about. So through this budget yesterday, people started kind of alerting that potentially the government could be seeing the CPP, which is our Canadian pension fund, essentially, that the government could be seeing that as a government asset and actually using that to leverage against all the debt they're looking to accumulate. Our CPP is over $700 billion right now, Canadian. And it is something that Mark Carney's had his eye on for a very, very long time. He's been trying to get Brookfield to get in there and get the government to essentially be able to do deals that involve CPP. And he's been doing this since before he was ever in government. Even when he was Trudeau's advisor, this was a talking point. Even Michael Barrett was bringing it up in committee, a year ago, 2 years ago at this point. And so a lot of people are just like, whoa. If they get a majority government, he could leverage our CPP, and CPP could be used to pay off these debts if they default on all this money they're borrowing. And so it's a lot of like, okay, that's a little bit of doom and gloom. Let's think about it for 2 seconds here. So right now there's a lot of safeguards around our CPP. The government just can't be like, it's our asset. We can do what we so please with it. No. This is Canadians' money. It's hands off for the government for the most part. But if they ever wanted to use it as, again, in this case, leverage against all the debt they're accumulating, there's a couple things they'd have to go through. First off, they would have to get it passed they'd have to get it passed in the House of Commons, which in this case would be no problem because they have a majority government. But then they would have to get it passed in the Senate, which that's a big one. However, stranger things have happened. But it would be hard, even though we have a Senate that's stacked, even then I don't see how they would allow that to go through unless Mark Carney came with a very, very convincing reason and made something up, as he usually does, to get people to move on things that are very controversial. So those are the first two things you have to get down. Then you actually have to get buy-in from the provinces. You have to get consent from 7 of 10 provinces. And that's where the big uphill climb comes with this. Again, the reasoning has to be very, very good, and it has to be pushed heavily politically for it to make sense. And I don't think you're going to see this move right away. But this comes back down to the situation if they ever get a majority. How do you start getting your narrative out there? Well, you start censoring the internet, as they've been trying to do with bills like Bill C-63, Bill C-8, these types of bills, where now if you're able to get those passed, well, now you're censoring the internet. Now you're censoring shows like mine, where you can kind of nuke us off the internet. And so you don't have people like me talking anymore. You can just have people listen to the CBC, and you keep feeding your talking points to CBC and the mainstream. And that's how you continue to coax and groom a society into accepting whatever reasoning you have. It would take a little bit of time, but 3.5 years would be enough time to try and make this all happen. And eventually you get buy-in across 7 of 10 provinces, and now he's leveraging your CPP. So there's a lot of hurdles to overcome to make that happen. There's a lot of things that need to take place for it to happen. However, there is a laneway. There is a route that it could happen. Stranger things have happened. However, it's highly unlikely, is what I'm saying. We've been seeing it in the US. That's the issue with private equity, where they've actually been creating new investment tools that are leveraging people's individual 401ks, which is our RRSPs here. And they are leveraging those to then invest and gain assets. And Mark Carney, being in the private equity field for a long time, he sees this, and he sees the CPP being able to do that for him here in Canada. So he has his eyes on it. It is in the realm of possibility. There's just a lot of mountains to climb and things he has to move in order to make it happen. It has to move fairly quickly in 3.5 years to make it happen. But we see it right now because, there was a lot of laws that came down after 2008 with private equity in the US where they can't just get blank checks and free money anymore. However, they've created these new investment tools with people's retirement funds so that if things do fall through the floor and the economy does collapse once again, well, the government will actually have to bail them out because it's people's retirements. They can't just let people's retirements flounder. And Carney will likely want to try and do the same thing with CPP. Again, it's a long ways off. Could it happen? Potentially. A lot of things have to fall into place for it to happen. However, it is something just to keep your eye on to see what moves that they continue to try and make, because CPP should be hands off to everybody. However, we'll just see if those floor crossers make it across for Carney even establish that majority government. So we will keep an eye on it throughout this week. And man, well, politics ain't boring, I'll tell you that much. Enjoy your morning. I'll see you this afternoon. Have a good one. I'm out.